Welcome to This Week in Prophecy with James Jacob Prash, presented by Maury LTV.
My name is Joshua. This week here with James Jacob Prash from Los Angeles, California. Thursday, October 10th, 2019. Jacob.
Blessings in Jesus, dear friends. Welcome to This Week in Prophecy. As usual, the week has been intense and is growing more intense. Let us look at what is of most prophetic significance in terms of the news, however, first of all. This week, events have transpired in Syria, an American-Middle East policy, that have had ramifications both internally in the United States, in Israel, and among the so-called Arab allies. Mr. Trump has decided to withdraw American support troops and special forces who've been fighting hand in hand with the Kurds against ISIS for 5 years in a 5-year alliance. And now, following Mr. Trump's withdrawal of these American troops, approximately 150 thus far, Syria has already launched a border incursion. Syria is wanting to establish a 20-mile incursion zone to stop what it sees as Kurdish terror attacking Syria itself, but also to create a refuge for Syrian refugees that otherwise might be heading to Europe. This is quite a mess and quite a debacle and quite a situation. Among other problems, among those 10,000 ISIS prisoners being held by the Kurds, it's unclear what will happen to them. The Kurds have said that it's no longer a priority to guard the ISIS prisoners captured by the United States and by the Kurds. What is going to happen to them? Will the Turks assume responsibility for them? This leaves a question and threatens to put 10,000 ISIS at liberty once again. This is a big issue, and it's not been answered by the White House or by the Pentagon. There is no definite plan as to what will take place with these 10,000 if Turkey will assume responsibility for them, and how can there be a handover of responsibility when Turkey is virtually in a border war with the Kurds. The Kurds see themselves as having stood with and fought with the Americans both in Iraq and in Syria. We have said for years that the Kurds are the only indigenous people in either Iraq or Syria who the United States can trust. But after fighting 5 years with the United States, now a NATO ally is bombing them after Mr. Trump's decision. This has had tremendous ramifications. Not only the 10,000 ISIS prisoners, but of the refugees that Syria is looking to have, of the refugees that the Turks are looking to deposit inside of this border region of Syria. You have ISIS supporters and ISIS sympathizers, the kind of people from whose ranks ISIS recruits. This has had tremendous ramifications in the United States. Among neocons, among establishment Republicans who are right-centered, such as Liz Cheney, such as Lindsey Graham. It was also a factor, undoubtedly, in the resignation or removal or departure from the administration of John Bolton. Mr. Trump is in a unique situation here, and the arguments look pretty solid against his policies in the eyes of many conservatives. What Mr. Trump has essentially done is the following. He's at all costs avoided direct conflict with Iran where possible, although there has been some in Syria. What he has rather done is concentrate on cyber warfare and on economic warfare against the Iranian regime. His fear being that if the United States enters direct military conflict with Iran, that it will solidify a patriotic sense within the country when he's trying to divide the country politically and internally by economic means. In other words, if the United States can be portrayed as an external attacking, invading force inside Iran by the mullahs, it will strengthen their hand. At the same time, his strategy is to weaken their hand through sanctions, through diplomatic isolation, and through cyber warfare. This is the situation. There was de facto piracy of an allied ship, of a ship of an allied nation, a British ship taken and abducted by Iran and taken into Iranian waters. And there was no response either from Britain or from the United States in support of Britain. The attack on Saudi Arabia, hitting 50% of Saudi Arabia's oil production capacity in eastern Saudi Arabia. Again, the United States would not behave as a mercenary for the Saudi Arabians and did not respond, and the Saudi Arabians would not respond on their own. These things cannot be seen in isolation from each other. And now, with the further policy of American withdrawal from northeastern Syria, the situation has emerged where the Arab allies, the Kurds themselves certainly, but also Israel are beginning to say, we cannot trust the United States beyond a limited point. We cannot trust the United States beyond a limited point. The moment the Americans withdrew, the forces of Erdogan from Turkey began their incursion, including bombing civilian targets, using American-manufactured F-16 bombers in order to do so. This took place at the same time where Iran began conducting not defensive, but offensive military exercises along the Turkish border, not necessarily directed against Turkey, but in that geographical area, and they are offensive, not defensive in nature. This is simultaneous with the continued ballistic missile buildup of Iran, which Israel and the Emirates see as a serious strategic threat. This creates a scenario where the Israelis may be compelled or feel compelled to act unilaterally without the United States, although United States support would in some degree be necessary to be effective, particularly if the attacks took place against Iran itself. Now, we have to understand something. Both the Americans and Israelis are left somewhat perplexed over the fact that the attacks on Saudi Arabia were not adequately detected by American or Israeli radar even after the missiles were in flight from Iran, which may have been launched from Yemen and some say from Iranian sympathizing regions of Iraq. The defensive system and the anti-aircraft system and anti-ballistic missile system did not effectively work. This suggests Russian and possibly Chinese participation, with Russia, China, the United States, and Israel using the Middle East once again as a proving ground for its own technology through proxy conflict. There will undoubtedly be modifications to the American Patriot system, to the Israeli Arrow system, etc., based on intelligence and experience gained from the Iranian attacks. Nonetheless, Iran has flexed its muscle successfully in Saudi Arabia. Iran has continued also its supply of armaments to Hezbollah, and it is doing so through an air base in Syria used by Russia called T4, again, the specter of Russian participation. This T4 base has seen Iranian aircraft landing, refueling, and transporting armaments, including light and medium explosive capacity ordnance and weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon, creating a, again, proxy front for conflict between Iran and Israel along the Galilee border with Hezbollah, basically an adjunct of the Iranian military. All of these things set up a very, very precarious situation that could explode. It is a powder keg. Now, the media has only shown largely one side of this. There is indeed another side. The Trump strategy has been to try to create instability inside of Iran, rather than sacrificing lives, particularly American lives, in confronting Iran. And again, has sought to do this by primarily economic and also by cyber warfare and diplomatic means, but particularly through the embargoes. Mr. Trump obviously does not want to consolidate public sentiment or sympathies or patriotic senses of national unity on back of the mullahs inside Iran, and has been willing to withhold responses to Iranian military aggression in the process, giving the sanctions and giving cyber warfare a chance to have their effect. He wants to destabilize the regime from within instead of attack it from without if he can. Also, just before the withdrawal of American troops, the Trump White House and the Pentagon ordered that the United States would cease its intelligence and reconnaissance support of Syrian operations in the area. 2,250 U.S. military advisors and commandos, special forces, remain active in Kurdish-controlled areas of Syria. It is not a complete giving over of Syria. It is only this border region of 20 miles depth from the Turkish border that Mr. Trump has said the United States will at this point withdraw from. Without the air cover of American intelligence and reconnaissance, air operations and Turkish air cover of its surface forces are impossible. Without the American assistance, Turkey itself cannot conquer all of Kurdish Iran. It is only this one area that the Trump administration has thus far been willing to sacrifice, but it has created ripples. How, after these people fought with us for 5 years, proven themselves reliable in Syria and Iraq, how can we abandon them to Turkey, who is not our friend, even though it is a NATO member? The SDF, the Syrian Democratic Front, largely composed of Kurds, have been the primary targets of Erdogan's invasion. Thus, it is the mess. Watch this space. On one hand, Mr. Trump is trying to destabilize Iran internally and is afraid that by attacking or counterattacking Iran, strategically or militarily, it is going to undermine efforts to destabilize the mullah regime internally. Better concentrate on economic, cyber, and diplomatic warfare than overt military conflict, if possible. That seems to be the situation. All of Turkish-controlled Syria has not been abandoned, only a small area, but it creates major problems concerning the 10,000 ISIS prisoners, concerning Syrian refugees who Turkey wishes to plant there. There's been largely silence from the NATO allies, except that Britain and Germany have both voiced concern about the Turkish actions against the Kurds, as has been happening in the United States. There are already efforts in the Senate launched by Republicans to bring economic sanctions against Turkey. Speaking very aggressively, Mr. Trump has stated that he is prepared to literally bring down the Turkish economy, destroy the Turkish economy. His policy is obviously one where we will only commit American troops where it's our interest. We're not going to fight other people's battles. These conflicts in the region between Kurds, between Arabs, between Turks, have among themselves have gone on for centuries, and we should not be dragged into it. We should not have become involved in it to begin with, which is something that, of course, was inaugurated by the Obama administration, trying to unseat Assad in a very ineffective manner. Mr. Trump inherited the situation, and he's trying to disentangle American ground forces from it. Why should we become involved in regional wars? However, there is more to it than that. His preference is to use economic and cyber warfare instead of strategic warfare, where American lives would be on the line. That is his policy. And he's made it clear that he will do to Turkey, a NATO ally, what he is presently doing to Iran, if Turkish aggression against the Kurds is expanded or continued along the line it presently is with attacks on civilians. Watch this space. This is important. But it has caused Israel to think we cannot rely on America beyond a limited point, even though the United States and Israel are in the process of concluding new strategic defense cooperative agreements. Meantime, Mr. Putin and Mr. Netanyahu have been in conference about this and other issues by telephone and are talking to each other directly. One of the ramifications for what is happening is this. The Kurds are saying we've been abandoned by the Americans. We have no choice but to talk to Russia and Assad, Russia's puppet. We have no option other than go to the Syrian regime that is Russian-backed of Assad. The United States has abandoned us. This is highly, highly problematic. Again, the 10,000 ISIS prisoners, what's going to become of them? Highly problematic. And of course, the refugees who they wish to settle there, highly problematic as they are recruiting grounds for ISIS. Will a new ISIS, following the destruction of the caliphate by Mr. Trump, be now facilitated by American policies? It is the fear of some people in the American Congress on both sides of the aisle that the mistakes of the Obama administration, when Obama created a vacuum in Iraq by removing the 10,000 remaining American advisory troops, that saw ISIS fill that vacuum, that Mr. Trump may be making a similar mistake by a premature removal of American forces. Again, he is trying to remove American ground forces from Afghanistan as well. The problem is when you have these vacuums with the Taliban, with Al-Qaeda, and with ISIS, Islamic terrorist forces move in and create a base that is inimical to the United States. We have seen this already. It is a quagmire, and that quagmire is the Middle East. Again, it's urgent that we pray for the Kurdish people, that we pray for President Trump, and that we pray for Israel. This week in prophecy. This week in prophecy, the impeachment process in the American Congress by the Democrats has come under response from the Trump administration. Mr. Trump, in a letter formulated from his administration, has stated that the present process is not a constitutional one. It violates separation of powers, and it is not following precedent of bringing the impeachment before the entire House, where the public can see it, where the opposition, that is the Republican Party, can bring its own witnesses, and there can be legal representation for Mr. Trump and his administration. Ms. Pelosi, who moved for impeachment before she even read the transcript of Mr. Trump's conversation with the president of the Ukraine, without even seeing it, moved for impeachment in response to pressure from the left wing within her own party, known as the Squad. It's all on back of closed doors. Why isn't it open? Why is it not out in the House as happened with Bill Clinton or with Richard Nixon? Why are witnesses not being able to be seen by the public? Why is the evidence not being presented? Why is there a lack of representation? It is all a political destruction of democratic and due judicial process that is being pursued for political purposes by Pelosi and the Democrats at the behest of the left wing of her party. She knows very well that if this took place in an open procedure in the House, many Democrats would find themselves in a difficult position, unable to support it, and it would discredit the case attempting to be made on back of closed doors against Mr. Trump. Now, again, what they are trying to argue philosophically is it is like a grand jury indictment. And a grand jury indictment, the accused is not necessarily represented. Counsel for the accused is not present. It can go on back of closed doors and bring an indictment. It is then at a trial where the evidence is introduced. That is what they are attempting to do, to draw an equivalence between what happens in a criminal prosecution and what takes place in an impeachment, even though it violates historical precedent. It is a constitutional issue. It may wind up in the Supreme Court, or she may be politically forced to cave in and allow an open impeachment hearing within the House. But that is what is taking place at present. The Trump administration is demanding to be able to summon witnesses of its own before the impeachment inquiry and to be represented. It cannot be something that takes place in secret and back of closed doors. That is what's happening this week in prophecy. Again, we pray that justice will prevail. We pray that this politically orchestrated fiasco will be something that backfires upon these people who are pandering to an increasingly left-wing and an increasingly anti-Israel and anti-American foreign policy. That is the squad, that which is represented by Tlaib, by Omar, by others within the House who are sympathetic to them. Something must give. But it's happening this week in prophecy. This week in prophecy. It is almost an earthquake what has taken place in Syria concerning the Kurds. And we can understand the reaction of the Kurdish people, of the allies of Israel, and of even conservatives within the American Congress and Senate. But there are two sides of the coin. There is a wisdom in the Trump strategy of avoiding armed conflict when you can achieve your goals with cyber warfare and with economic means. He has not pandered to the Turks. He has told them, I will destroy your economy. And he said so in no uncertain terms. And he has not withdrawn from all of Kurdish-controlled Syria, only a small area along the Turkish border. But the ramifications are inescapable, and the consequences are potentially disastrous. It is a very dangerous game. Prayer is needed. Meantime, in Israel, 4 days of pre-impeachment, as it were, or pre-indictment hearings with the Israeli Attorney General have taken place, with legal counsel for Mr. Netanyahu asking that these charges and allegations be dismissed. The Attorney General will need to make a decision before the end of the present year, 2019. Attorney General Avihai Mandelblit will give this decision, but the 4 days of initial hearings concerning Mr. Netanyahu's legal predicament, where he's being accused of bribery and other misdemeanors, is going to be a factor in any political outcome. It is certainly a factor in his capacity to form a coalition government. These 4 days have now taken place. We may not know the ultimate outcome until before the end of the year, but what is for sure is the political ramifications for the Israeli electoral process could conceivably end in an unprecedented third election. This is something that among democracies has only ever happened in Italy, where governments would not be able to last even a matter of months. This has taken place a number of times in Italy, but it has never happened in Israel. But it seems to be happening this week in prophecy. My name is James Jacob Prash. Thank you so much for listening. Please pray for the situation concerning the Kurds. Pray for God's wisdom and courage for President Trump. And please pray for Israel and the peace of Jerusalem. God bless and thank you so much.
For more information about Moriel, check out our website www.moriel.org.